answering you like this,
Yeah.
even if I was doing the same answers, the body language is totally different, right? And you think, oh, she doesn't really want to be here. Maybe she's busy. The minute you lean towards people, and of course, if you match that with the smiling and the nodding, you're really showing interest.
So, hi everyone, welcome to our fireside chat. My name is Anchal, and I call myself an HR enthusiast, people and culture champion. And I'm super excited to have you join us today. I am here with Mimi Nicklin, who's a renowned best-selling author, founder of Empathy Everywhere, a keynote speaker, a podcaster. Mimi has dedicated her career to showing how empathy can transform workplaces and leadership styles. So, Mimi, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. Yeah. I mean, Anchal, for me, just to have this conversation with someone that's passionate about similar things and just how we create more connection in our workplaces. Yeah, it's an honor, really. So I'm happy to be here.
So thank you so much. So let's dig into the session. So starting, we would really want to know your journey, Mimi. You have what has inspired you to become an empathy advocate? What was the turning point in your life where you felt that no, I should pursue this. I'm doing well in my career, but something is missing, or the purpose is missing, or something. I'm sure you would have a journey similar to this. I would want to know that what changed.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Anchal, for me, this was not a planned shift, right? So I think for many people, they're out there searching for their purpose, looking for that shift moment, looking to escape the corporate world. It was really different for me. I was in a role in Dubai at the time, in around 2018, 2019. And I had taken over a business that needed substantial turnaround. And to be honest, the truth at the time was I was quite overwhelmed by that challenge because I had come from very corporate, large organizations, and I had moved into a far smaller organization in the Gulf, in the Middle East. And I didn't feel like I had the right skills to really succeed in that turnaround. And in going through that process, I reached out to a business coach. And the business coach that I met was asking me questions about my leadership style and how I was going to lead through that change. And she asked me one question that totally changed my life. And that was when I was talking about intuitive leadership and being an intuitive leader, which is what I thought I was. She stopped me and she said, Mimi, is it intuition or is it empathy? And at the time, I remember thinking, no way, right? What's empathy got to do with it? But I went away and I started studying empathy, and the empathy deficit in our world and our workplaces. So the lack of connection, the lack of belonging in our workplaces. And fundamentally, that changed my life. I ended up writing my book and my first podcast where about 85,000 people came in COVID year. It was crazy. And yeah, my life changed. And absolutely, if you ask me now, is this your purpose? Then I would say definitely. But I think my purpose became me rather than the other way around.
Amazing. What an inspiring story. I'm sure people would definitely get inspired by your story and would want to pursue this also in their life, like me. So super inspiring, Mimi. So my next question is that can empathy be taught or is it
Mm.
an innate quality?
No, absolutely. It can be taught. So empathy is actually a skill set. It's a skill set that's built into your brain, a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. So you are born with the ability to understand others, to connect with others. We're what we call a pro-social species. That means we do better when we're together, when we're connected with other people. So because of that, like any skill set, the more you practice it, the more permanent it becomes, the better at it you become. So empathy is fundamentally about perspective taking, right? That skill set that allows you to understand how other people are seeing or experiencing or working in the same space as you. So that is a skill. It's not an emotion. And therefore, yes, it can be taught. You can learn it. Your team can learn it. If you're in HR, you can teach your entire organization to become more empathetic.
Great. I think I completely agree. It's something that definitely can be taught. I am also, as a person, as an individual, also, I've been practicing empathy, I mean, in the past few years. And it's all about conscious, you sort of know, whenever you're in a situation, you tell your conscience that, no, you have to be aware about it and you are supposed to behave like this, try to be in others' shoes and understand instead of being very transactional and mechanical and being very dictatorial about it. So it's about awareness. So yeah. Now, next question is what aspects of empathy remain constant and what aspects change in context of stages of organization or type of organization. For example, organization which has a startup culture, hustle culture, high work pressure culture, whereas an organization versus an organization which is pretty, large organization, stable, uh, very stable in terms of their protocol and stuff. How does it change in terms of empathy as a business?
The reality is, Anshal, that empathy has to become part of culture, right? So it has to come from the top, it has to come from the leadership. I often say to HR teams, what you measure manifests. So if you just want to be empathetic, but you don't actually formalize that, then of course it doesn't stay consistent. It doesn't matter if you are a startup or a corporate or a small business or any business, right? Teams like to have responsibility, accountability. They need to know what you expect from them. So if you're looking at creating empathetic culture, fundamentally at the very core of that is listening, right? Is being able to listen to others in meetings, in structure, in culture. And that is a skill that people have to be taught because, ironically, we're always telling people to listen, but we don't often teach them to listen, except when they're very, very small, right? When you have little children around you, 2, 3, 4 years old, we spend a lot of time saying, listen to auntie, listen to mummy, listen to teacher. But when we're in the workplace, we no longer teach that. We don't even remind each other. So I think it's less about the type of business and more about the type of culture and or leadership that's in that business and their commitment to leveraging empathy, both from a people point of view, because of course it improves our engagement at work by some really high percentages, like 68%, but also from a performance point of view, because all business indicators improve when there are higher levels of empathy. In fact, profit improves by 23% in empathetic organizations. So it is far more about that intentionality to actually build empathy into your culture, into your ways of working, into your customer engagements, than it is necessarily about the type of business. Does that make sense?
It definitely makes sense. I think I mean, you said that irrespective of what stage of business you are in, it's important that work empathy should be absorbed or should be propagated or incorporated in a workplace culture. Is super, super important, which directly also impacts the business.
Yep.
So, yeah. So my next question is that what aspects of empathy change or it may change or it remains the same in context of an early stage professional or a mid-level manager or a C-suite, founders or C-suite leadership. How does it change from different levels of a professional person?
Look, I think do you know what? You're probably the first person that's ever asked me that, and I've been answering questions on empathy for 5 years. I don't think, Anchal, again, it's necessarily about the stage of your career, but more your intention and accountability to do that. Where I think it does change is when I have sessions or webinars or something with lots of middle management teams, especially in India. Sometimes there's like 1,800 people on a Teams call, right, in Indian businesses. And that middle management layer will often ask me, can we create the empathy from here, or does it have to come from the top? What I would say to them is that anybody can create empathy in your teams and those you engage with your customers, the people that are around you every day. But that sustainability of empathy has to come from the top. So when you talk about different roles and different levels, I think the difference is that your responsibility, the more senior you become, the responsibility that you have to inculcate, to put into process, to put into measurement, KPIs, expectations, that changes. Also, role modeling changes, right? So whether you are with, again, with children or employees in the workplace, anyone who is looking up to someone else as a leader is going to reflect through role modeling. So if you are a senior leader and you believe in a business where there's more psychological safety, where people are included, where all of these sort of metrics of belonging matter, again, to your people, but also to your performance, you have to role model it, right? If I don't listen to you, if I'm the leader and I'm never interested in Anchal's opinion and I never really listen to you and I cut you off and I interrupt and I'm not listening, then I can't create a culture of listening. So I think what changes is potentially the way you deliver on that as you get more senior, because you have more and more people looking up to you to learn and to reflect. But the actual skill of empathy is a human skill. So it doesn't matter if you're 17, 37, or 77, that ability to connect with other people is a very human skill.
I think really well said. I completely understand. And as leaders, I think it's all the more, it's a huge responsibility as leaders to ensure that you're modeling and you're setting right expectations, because people do take away traits, how you behave from leaders. And it's important that how, as a leader, you're setting examples for rest of the people in the company.
Yeah.
And that's how you create culture. It has to always come from top, and then of course it can be easily widespread among employees. Okay, so my next question is some few tips and tricks or quick thing where you can help us understand that what are the practical ways where leaders can demonstrate empathy in their daily interactions, while, like I said, that being conscious about it, how as leader I should exercise empathy when I am working. What like few tips that you would like to give?
Yeah, why don't we do three? Like three really simple tips. And actually, if you watch this video back, you'll see me doing them, with you now. So the first thing I would say is nodding, right? So it's a physical thing, right? When you want to show empathy, show that you're listening, show that you're interested in your team. There's a couple of micro sort of movements and moments that you can use to do that. And one of them is nodding, right? And I do it very naturally, but you'll see I'm doing it now. But you'll
Yeah.
see if you look back that as you're asking me questions, as you're feeding back on my answers,
Mm.
I'm nodding. I'm showing you even on the screen, because people always ask me, can you empathize on screen? Yes. That I'm interested, I'm listening, I'm with you, right? I'm with you in the room. So nodding and also smiling are really important kind of micro influences on showing people that you're listening. So that's super simple, right? Just nod.
Yeah.
However you're comfortable, I would say that's a really simple one to show listening. The second I'd say is to lean in. And of course, there are cultural sensitivities around this. There are gender sensitivities. So you have to be careful how you're leaning in. But again, if you look at me on the screen and when I do webinars or anything online or in person, I want my audience to know I'm with them, right? So rather than sitting back, if I was answering you like this,
Yeah.
even if I was doing the same answers, the body language is totally different, right? And you think, oh, she doesn't really want to be here. Maybe she's busy. The minute you lean towards people, and of course, if you match that with the smiling and the nodding, you're really showing interest. So those first two tips are just super simple because anyone can do them, right? Anyone can do them. Even all you leaders that tell me I don't have time, you have time to nod, right? So those are really simple ways to create connection. But the third one takes a little bit more thinking, is around asking questions. Because the core to understanding people is curiosity, right? You have to be curious to understand others. So often when HR leaders or senior leaders come to me about, I don't know, like a D&I policy or something they want to change, and I ask them, well, have you asked your team? And they they always look at me and they're like, oh no, we didn't. So I say to them, well, I don't know, for example, with for female empowerment in the workplace, right? I'll say to them, well, how do you know how your female employees want to be included or want to be empowered if you haven't asked them, right? So asking questions is my number three. And those questions should be open-ended. So something like, will you tell me more about that? Or I'd like to understand how you got to that conclusion. Or can you help me understand more about why you would like to do that? Right? Open-ended questions that just show people, number one, that I'm listening, right? I'm interested in you. And number two, it's giving permission to share. So the more open you are, the more people share, the more insight or intelligence or empathy you can have for them. So, Anchal, I like to keep them super simple for people that are learning this, right? So, number one is nodding, smiling. Number two is facing the speaker, leaning in, having your shoulders square. And number three is asking open-ended questions. If you start with those three things, you will, I promise you will significantly shift your engagement at work.
I think what you have told just right now, I just feel I should also be mindful of it, like whenever I am interacting with people, because you somehow you don't remember, you're not aware of it. But I'm sure these small little things can make the other person in front of you more comfortable, me more open to you, and they feel more respected and valued during discussion, which is super important, that you feel like you're being heard in an organization. In like, for example, I've worked in many organizations where this question or this concern always comes, that I just do not feel that I am being heard, and for them this is super important. When employees or report, like even to the last mile, a junior employee feel that their managers, they hear them, they
Mm.
perform amazingly better because they feel they're more respected, they're more valued, they are more listened. So I think,
Yeah.
although these are like very simple, but we often tend to forget, but super important. I couldn't agree more. I'm like super comfortable talking to you right now, only because you've been so approachable, so kind, so open in the discussion, as well as before we started with this chat. So yeah, super important.
Awesome.
Now, my next question is, how do you balance empathy with accountability to ensure both kindness and performance exist? Wherein I'm talking from an aspect where sometimes or managers or leaders say that employees take undue advantage of being more empathetic. They overutilize this and they being too open with them. So how do we make sure that we balance both kindness and performance, and they can coexist?
Look, I think there's a couple of pieces in that which are really important. And I'm going to distinguish a little bit between kindness and empathy, not because they're mutually exclusive, they can live together, but because they are different things. And why that's important to me, particularly in India, and a huge amount of my work is in India, is that to your last insight, we have in India and in all of South Asia this real concern that if I'm nice, if I'm kind to people, they will take advantage of me, or, I can't make the decisions I need to make in the business. And I fully understand why people feel that. Being empathetic has nothing to do with being kind. You can be kind while you are being empathetic. But empathy exists, for example, in modeling by the FBI, in the army, in hostage negotiation. Empathy is not an innately kind skill. So you can make very tough decisions around war zones, hostages, redundancies with empathy and not necessarily be kind. Now, of course, my preference is that the whole world is kind, right? And like you said, I'm really happy that you experience my engagement with you as kind. I want to be kind to everybody, and that's part of my personal belief system. But as leaders listening, if you work in an extremely tough environment where you don't feel that you can necessarily be as kind as maybe you are in your personal life, that doesn't mean you can't use your empathy, because your empathy is the skill set, right? Kindness is a decision, it's a choice, it's an emotion, right? Like compassion, like sympathy, they're emotions, they're actions, they're not skill sets. So I want to just add that, Anchal, because for me, I believe that the more the world talks about empathy, the more empathy the world will have. And there's never been a time when we need that understanding. And more than now. And I don't want leaders or people listening to think, I can't be kind. That's not the way this goes. I want to separate them. But that said, you asked about accountability, and it is really, really important, whether that's accountability to yourself or within your team or within your culture. And it touches on what I said earlier around, measurement, making things manifest. If you don't create the space for your team to be accountable to, for example, listen in meetings. So it could be a really small thing. I'm trying to think, like listening to all the voices in the room, not to a point that it's inefficient,
Yeah.
but as a culture, to make sure that if there are, for example, junior members or graduates, for example, in the room, that they are given permission to speak, because they're there to be part of the team. They're there to learn. They have probably brilliant opinions. But in many of our businesses in South Asia, we still have such hierarchical structures that only the senior people speak, right? And everybody else listens. So if you want to create more empathy, you need to listen more. And if that is an expectation, you have to make your middle management and other senior managers aware of that accountability. That leader, you are accountable for making sure people are heard in this business, for making sure that more voices are heard other than yours. So yes, it is really important that accountability, responsibility, awareness of creating a listening-led business is really, really important to sustain it.
Wow. I think many managers and leaders would really thank me later after after this answer, because I do experience such kind of conflict in their head when they are interacting, and when we have feedback discussion with employees, they say completely different thing, and managers are pretty shocked and surprised at how do I deal this is such a complex problem. The employee is not working, I cannot be that open or that empathetic, because they take advantage of it. So I completely understand the conflict, and you very well had explained that how can we manage such situation. So
Mm.
now my next question is, what message would you like to give to organization who still view empathy as a soft skill rather than a strategic necessity?
Well, what I would do, Angela, is probably just give them the data, because that's really what I spend my life doing, which is flying around the world and sharing with leaders just like you describe, to help them understand why this is a business priority. Because there is, as I touched on earlier, no business indicator that does not improve than when people feel that they're seen, they're heard, and they belong. Because we are a pro-social species, because of neuroscience. So a very short lesson is that when you feel under stress or threat, of which exclusion is one of them, right? So the human brain will respond to exclusion, to not being seen, not being respected, not being valued, as a threat. That's how our brain understands that. When you live in that state, we release a whole lot of hormones into our body, adrenaline, cortisol, a couple of others, but hormones that are meant to come into your body for a short period of time and help you escape a threat, right? That's in front of you. So if your employees are living under constant lack of connection, no one's interested in them, no one's valuing their opinion, they are living under a constant state of it's called the fight or flight response, this high stress zone, right? With all these hormones flying around their body. When you do that, their brains quite literally, physiologically, cannot perform at their peak, because the human body is putting hormones into the body to stop their brain working at its peak, because it perceives that there's a fear, there's a threat, and they need to be using other parts of their body, for example, arms to fight, lungs to run away, whatever the body thinks that threat is, right? So what I do in a lot of my content is teach in a bit more depth than that, but the basics of neuroscience, to say, if you want sustained performance, the only way to get there is to make sure that your teams feel included and safe, and that they belong, and that they're valued and respected, and that there's equity in the workplace. And when you do that, you'll see endless data. 23% higher profit, 48% higher levels of innovation, 17% higher levels of productivity, 68% higher levels of engagement in the workplace and motivation. So, and I could go through data all day, right? There's no end to the data. It's not my data, it's data from Harvard and Gallup and big, research organizations. So fundamentally, sustained success relies on connectivity in the workplace. That kind of master team relationship of old, which was fundamentally power or fear based, no longer has a place in the world. So if I had a group of leaders that didn't believe in this, that's where I would start. I would start with the neuroscience because this is about human beings. I'm not making it up. This is how the human brain works. So either leverage it or don't. And this is the data on the back of that from some of the world's largest research organizations to show you that when you get it right, people do better. And the last statistic I would say, Anchal, because I love it, is there was some data from the Global State of Workplace report last year. And they asked the question to their teams, and all these businesses had over 50,000 members, so big business, the importance of empathy. And they answered that, and there was very high response. But the one I want to state is that 92% of all employees said that while they required empathy at work, they wanted to be understood and valued, 92% said that should never impact superior performance. So what that tells you is your employees do want you to listen. They want you to treat them like a valued human, but 92% of them also want to grow, right? As humans, we want to win. So the more of this you create in your workplace, the higher they're going to perform, the longer they're going to stay in their roles, the more of their brain power, creativity, strategy, risk-taking, outside the box thinking they're going to use. So it's a very good story. And yeah, I mean, I could tell it all day, but I don't think I'd have a problem convincing this group of fictional leaders because it really is a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think I'm super. I mean, data sets, they speak for itself that how if we change few things, few relationships, how we address relationships, how we talk to employees, how we make them feel valued can impact large organization and businesses. So definitely a very insightful answer, Mimi. The next question is, what advice would you give to employees who feel their leaders or manager lack empathy? It's a very tricky side of a question where they feel, how do they address it to their managers or leaders where they feel that, this in their managers and leaders, it lacks.
Mm. I get asked this question a lot, again, particularly in South Asia. It's a long answer, but the short version, given we don't have a huge amount of time, there's two things I would say. Number one is the recognition that you can't change other people. So if you have a boss or a leader who, quite frankly, is never going to listen, is not interested in your status, your well-being, your role in the team, in the end, you either have to come to terms with that or leave. Right. I say this to people all the time. You cannot change somebody else, particularly somebody else that is not within your sort of control. And by that, I mean, if you're the leader, you have a higher chance. But if you're looking up at your bosses, it's harder. So that's the one thing I would really say. And I think that impacts all areas of life, your romantic relationships, your familial relationships. You can't change other people. They have to change themselves. But the second thing I would say, which is really powerful, a little bit scary, I get it, but very powerful, is sometimes it just takes the bringing of awareness to something that your boss, your leader may not even have reflected in themselves. Because as you touched on earlier, and I also touched on it, when we're sort of under stress, no time, it can be really easy to forget to do these things. So I would also encourage people to very politely talk to your leaders if you don't feel you're getting this from them. So an example of that would be someone coming to me and saying, Mimi, I really want to do well this year. I'm really excited about our objectives, and I love how you've set up this strategy for the year. Sometimes I feel that I'm not communicating well enough for you to be able to really hear my ideas and how I'd like to work with you. Is there a better way that I can communicate with you so that you can hear some of my ideas a little bit more often? So what you have done there is you've pointed out the challenge. You've told that leader, I don't think you listen to me, basically, but you've done it in a way in empathy for them. So you've asked Mimi, how can I communicate better so that you can listen to me better, right? And that type of conversational structure is really empowering for both sides. because you feel like you've expressed yourself. You've told them, I don't think you listen to me, and I want you to listen to me more. That's my expectation. That's my hope from this conversation. But you've also put it in their court. And in empathy for them, you said, how can I do this better so that we can have that relationship? Because, of course, nobody knows what's going on in somebody else's life and, the stresses and pressures and realities on that leader and her leader and her leader the whole way up. So, as I said, it's not always easy, but in the end, you have to name things out loud because otherwise they never get solved.
I think this is one of the like I have learned so much from this conversation, but this is one thing
Oh,
definitely I'm going to take away from me with me, because I know how when we work at the ground level, we see real problems and issues, and I think this is something that would definitely I can help others in incorporating this. How do we address situations which is like I said, very sensitive? How can we talk to our leaders? I think this is my personal key takeaway from this conversation. So moving to the last conversation, last question, which is that empathy in Indian context,
mhm.
empathy is caricatured as a special treatment towards DEI employees, and
Mm.
incidentally, the theme for this International Women Day 2025 is accelerate action.
Okay.
So, from all of that you've shared, my question is empathy is clearly a fuel in this entire movement. And
Yeah.
what are your closing thoughts on practicing empathy in order to accelerate action?
You mean from a gender point of view or just an inclusion in general point of view?
Just a general inclusion point of view.
Look, I think I didn't know that was the theme for this year, but it seems like a really good theme and a very poignant one, given those International Women's Day themes come out of the US. And the US right now is removing D&I initiatives from their agendas. And in some states, it will soon be illegal to have a diversity agenda in your organization. So Amazon, Walmart, Apple removing these programs from their platforms, from their businesses as we speak, now in January 25. So, I mean, I think in the end, all inclusion does come back to understanding, because as I touched on earlier, how can you ever include people if you don't know how they want to be included? So I would say that the way to really accelerate action in this space is to teach more people, whether that's L&D or D&I professionals or organizations or teams, to really hone those listening skills. As I mentioned earlier, people don't know how to listen. They think they're listening, they're actually hearing. And those are very different realities, right? Hearing is a natural for most people. If they don't have any hearing issues, hearing is a natural capacity. If I clap my hands, you
Mm,
can hear it, right?
yeah.
Listen is an active skill set. And that's why I guess travel every week to teach it, right?
Okay, I think so. Thank you so much, Mimi. The entire session was so informative for me as an individual. I think, as an HR professional, I got to learn a lot of things that I was not even aware of, and it's all about conscious and coming from a person who has an expertise in this, has really helped me as an individual. Definitely, there are some major key takeaways from this conversation. I'm sure that others, my friends, my colleagues, the other people, I'm sure they would really enjoy this conversation. Hope to have such kind of discussions with you in future. Would definitely love to catch up with you in person. Uh, Thank you so much, Mimi.